Welcome to Sacred Stories, a sacred space where the beautiful divine voices of today are shared. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Brooks, and together, with the help of our incredible and courageous guests, we are going on a powerful journey, a sacred journey into our shared consciousness. Now, today I'm so excited because we're speaking with Vivian Elani, and she's author of a brand new book from Sacred Stories Publishing called Granite and Gravity. What I love about Granite and Gravity, in addition that it's just a phenomenal story, is that it really marries two of my passions, my favorite book genre, which is historical fiction, and pretty much my life's purpose, which is the spiritual journey and all aspects of the spiritual journey. So Granite and Gravity is this tremendous book that speaks to the building of the Brooklyn Bridge and a souls group, Reincarnated Lives Together. And so I can't wait to dive in with Vivian Elani and have her tell you all about Granite and Gravity. So I'll say, welcome, Vivian, to Sacred Stories.
Thank you, Reverend Patricia. It's really great to be here on Sacred Stories with you, and I'm really excited to talk about my book with you.
I'm so excited that you're here. As I said from the beginning, you know, historical fiction and the spiritual journey, you can't find a better marriage for me. I think it's phenomenal.
Well, thank you.
So let's start with your book. Now we're going to dive into your book. We're going to dive into your sacred story. We're going to have a really great conversation. But tell our listeners a little bit more about what Granite and Gravity is about.
Well, Granite and Gravity, like you were saying, it melds some history of New York, the Brooklyn Bridge, which is the most well-known landmark, I think, in the world, and reincarnation, and even a love story is thrown in there. But what you'll find in Granite and Gravity is basically a dysfunctional group of souls. The Council of Souls, who really oversees all these soul groups, has realized that this soul group is really not working out well. They kind of, almost enable each other in the past several lives. They haven't been helping each other. And there is one person in the group that's more advanced than the rest. And they were really considering breaking up the group and letting the one more advanced soul move on and then breaking up the rest of them because they just didn't seem to gel. So instead of doing that, they reconsider and they decide to put Aria in charge of the group, and they ask her to arrange their next life together, which is going to take place in New York City during the 1800s. And it's really up to her to pull the group together. So the story is really about how she pulls the group together and how she oversees their lives and what kind of progress they make. So that's pretty much the story.
So reincarnation, and you bring in addition to reincarnation, there's many books that are written about past lives and reincarnation, but you have a whole group of people traveling together as a soul group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. It is a group. At first, I was just going to write about maybe a couple, and then I really wanted to bring a group dynamic into the story because it just has a lot more to offer as far as people's problems and their differences. And
do you believe
the one difference, I'm sorry, I was just going to say the one difference between my book and other books is that when my soul group does go to Earth, they really don't know they're reincarnated. A lot of books about reincarnation, the people know that they're reincarnated, or they, go under hypnosis and they know that they're reincarnated and they have problems to solve. Whereas my characters, they're on Earth and they're just like any other person. They have problems and they just don't know what to do about the problems.
Do you believe that souls travel in soul groups, that we reincarnate together?
I think that some do. I think some are here independently and some souls do travel in groups. I do believe that.
I think it's a really beautiful and heartwarming thought and idea to think that we travel in groups. I believe we do. But I think the difference and what you're really presenting is that this is something lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, that it's not just, oh, maybe I had a past life with this one and now I'm in another past life with that one, that this is really so much more planned and we really are closer to certain other souls or certain souls.
Right. And we do have history with these souls, and sometimes some residual will follow us from one lifetime to the next. So in a previous life, if you have something that didn't work out, like, with my particular soul group that I wrote about, they have been making the same problems. They've been having the same problems life after life. And that's what worries the Council of Souls. So hopefully in this life, Area can make a change and have them progress on.
Now, you mentioned the book is written in the late 1800s and in the United States, and you mentioned the Brooklyn Bridge. Why did you pick that time period for your book?
Well, when I first started writing the book, I did want it to take place in New York City, and I did want it to take place in the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. And I, too, have an affinity to historical type books. So I really wanted it to follow the timeline of some historical event in New York City. So I started looking at, like, the building of the Empire State Building, even the building of the Twin Towers I considered, or how Thomas Edison introduced electricity, and the first place that he introduced electricity was in New York City. But the Brooklyn Bridge really resonated with me because it is really ingrained in our culture, especially here in the Northeast. And I was born in New York City and have family in New York City, and I've traveled over it so many times. So it really resonated with me as a landmark. And it was really symbolic in the way that it connects two pieces of land because it's a bridge. And connecting those two pieces of land back then was a very radical idea. New York City was a city and Brooklyn was farmland. So that connection was really important during that time frame, especially for Brooklyn. And it also represented to me this linking of Earth and the soul world. So there's just a lot of things that fit with the Brooklyn Bridge in my story.
Now, the title of your book, Granite and Gravity, also relates to the Brooklyn Bridge. Can you share that? Yeah, talk about that a little bit, please.
Well, the term granite and gravity was first referred to by Washington Roebling, who was actually the second chief engineer of the bridge. And his father also referred to it as a grand harmony of opposing forces. And that really resonates throughout the story because my characters are always dealing with opposing forces in their lives, like, many of us. So, one person has an engineering degree but doesn't really want to be an engineer. He'd rather work at the pub, but he's getting forced into it by his father. So there's a theme of opposing forces throughout the story, and how do my characters deal with it?
The history of the bridge is also interwoven through your story, but you use a really unique way of writing your story in that you write different chapters from different people's perspectives, even from the bridge's perspective or the bridge's voice in the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why did you decide to use that writing style? It's very powerful and it works beautifully for your story.
Well, as I started writing it, I realized that there were, it took 13 years to build the Brooklyn Bridge, and there was a lot of drama around the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it was so groundbreaking. So when I started writing the story, I started making connections between the storyline of my characters and the bridge. Like, two of my characters get married the day that the two arches are joined together. So it's that sort of inserting the stories of the Brooklyn Bridge throughout the story that mirror what my characters are going through.
Now, you researched the bridge, though, so what's in the story is historically correct, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. To the best
That's what I love.
knowledge.
To the best of the research you could do, right?
Yes.
That's what I love about historical fiction. So in not only do you get a great story because you have the story of the soul group and all of their opposing forces and all of the drama that's associated with that and whether Arya is going to succeed in this soul group, meeting their life's goals, let's say. You also get the beautiful history of a really incredible period of time interwoven.
Yeah. And you know what? There were some surprising things that I found out during my research. For example, the chief engineer, John Roebling, who designed the bridge, he was a very serious scientist and engineer, yet he was very spiritual. He actually believed in reincarnation, and he held seances to try and talk to his deceased wife. And I found that to be so surprising for a man of science.
I would imagine that John Roebling, if he's in the spirit world now, if he's not reincarnated, probably one of your friends, I would have, right? Maybe he's you, but I would imagine that he would find your novel, Granite and Gravity, just so incredibly perfect in that you've written about the Brooklyn Bridge and soul groups and reincarnation together.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope that he would like it, and I doubt it's me. That's for sure. I hope he's putting his great mind to use elsewhere.
Well, that's fascinating. It's probably someone you know. I would imagine. That just seems so fittingly perfect right now. Well, let me ask you a question. So this is Sacred Stories, and we always share our sacred story. I'm just really fascinated, though, with what drew you in your life. What life events, or what is it about Vivian Elani that drew you to writing a book on soul groups and reincarnation?
It was such a slow evolution. It's one of these things where, you're growing up and you're going to college, and, sort of like, sometimes I feel like Nathan, where I went to college and maybe I didn't study the right thing. It really wasn't my calling. I always thought I should have been a writer, but instead I went into the technology area, the software development industry, which I've been a part of during the last 30 years. Then, sometimes you just lose your inner voice. You get caught up in your career and you start raising children, and you lose sight of what you really wanted to do. So, you're 45 and you're looking at 50 years old, and you realize that you lost your inner voice. So I took some time to really figure out where that voice was and why didn't I write this book? I kept asking myself, and I asked myself that question for a year. And you sort of become afraid to listen to that inner voice because you start thinking about, well, what will my husband think? I'm going to write a book about reincarnation. I've never talked about spirituality like this with him before. I sort of have been holding back for many years on this quest that I want to start. And finally, I just put that all aside, and I said, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to write down a date, and this is going to be the day that I start my book about reincarnation. And, I told my husband, and he was totally supportive, but still it was a scary proposition because I had never written a short story before, let alone a book. So that's kind of how I got there, just by listening to that inner voice and, sort of remembering that goal that I had so many years ago.
That's such a beautiful way to say it, listening to the inner voice. And I do agree with you that many, many people lose the inner voice. And they get caught up with the must-dos and have-tos of their life. Mm-hmm. And they don't revisit it. And so I just want to give you, I want to acknowledge the courage for you to do that, because first of all, in addition to writing a book, it's so many people's dream and passion, and truly very few people really accomplish it, right? But for you to be able to not only step into the passion of writing the book, but to write it about something that was outside of maybe what your norm is and what people knew you for and mm-hmm. how they thought of you, but to really go back and say, hey, look, like I have this inner voice and I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to have the courage to do that. That is actually very inspiring, because many, many, many people hear their inner voice but they don't have the courage to tune in, and follow it.
Yeah, it was very scary. And even when I was writing the book, it was, every time I started writing, I immediately thought, what would people think? What are people going to think about this? They're going to read this chapter and they're going to think I'm like crazy, or I have these crazy thoughts and it's not me. And so I had to really let go of all of those impediments within myself, to really just let go and listen to the story that I had to tell and just push aside what people might think of me. And it's a scary proposition.
How do you feel now? How do you feel? Do you feel that you have moved past that fear of that you're in a different place now?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not fearful of it anymore. I talk about it freely with friends, whereas it was kind of my little secret for a few years while I was writing the book. It did take me about 4 years to write the book. And that was my journey. And when I completed it, I really wasn't afraid of that anymore.
Wow. So let me ask you, do you have a favorite part of the book?
I do have a favorite part of the book because it really mirrors my experience. There's a part in the book towards the end when Flora, the main character, confesses to her husband, who is Nathan, that she has feelings of spirituality and she believes in reincarnation. And to her, she had spent her whole life just really being this, not wanting to show anyone her emotion. That was really a breakthrough for her, to have the courage to tell her husband that she believed in this kind of spirituality. And of course, at first, he was like, that goes against all of, my religious beliefs. And she said, no, this is what I believe. And for her, it was very liberating. And for him, in retrospect, he felt sad that he didn't discuss it with her more. But by the time he realized that he should have done that, it was too late.
So don't give away any of the surprises in the book or any of the, because we want everyone to read it and we don't want to spoil it. But there's Flora and Nathan. There's Aria, mm-hmm. who is still in the spirit world, that's kind of orchestrating. Who are the other characters in the book?
There's Elizabeth, who is Nathan's best friend from 5 Points. He grew up in 5 Points, and she decides to become a prostitute instead of pursuing any other vocation. And that's one of her problems in this, and one of the problems that she's supposed to overcome as a soul. There's also Victoria, who is Flora's adopted sister, and they have quite a history together, one always controlling the other. So it's always been this who can control the other person sort of thing throughout all of their lives. So that is one of their problems that they have to overcome during this lifetime. And then there's Olivia, who is their friend, everyone's friend, And she's kind of the person that holds everyone together and pokes them in the right direction in a very subtle way. But she's kind of the stable person throughout the story.
It really is a phenomenal book. I mean, I'm just so happy and proud to be able to have it published by Sacred Stories Publishing. I mean, it's rich in characters. There's actually 6 characters, including Arya, that you really, really create so well, so vividly that the people, you feel that you know them, as you should as you're reading through the book. You do a beautiful job of following the construction and all of the drama. There was a lot of drama surrounding the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And so much history that I learned from that time period reading your book. And you really tie in so beautifully the spiritual aspect and the idea of reincarnation and past lives and repeating or having to revisit together, right? If you didn't accomplish something in one life. All aspects of your book are so beautifully done, and so they interweave with each other so effortlessly. It's a phenomenal book, Vivian.
Oh, thank you so much, Patricia. That's really sweet of you.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I completely, it's the kind of book you can just kind of get lost in. And like I say, you marry my favorite genre, which is historical fiction, and pretty much my life's work, which is spirituality. So, I'm definitely in. Do you have any other books coming? Are you looking to continue writing?
Oh, yes. I am writing a book. It takes place in Kenmore, New York, which is the town I grew up in. It's a suburb of Buffalo. It takes place during the 1970s, so there's not much research I have to do, thank goodness, since I grew up in that era. And it's about a young woman named Harvest. She's actually in high school, and she's been plagued with visions her entire life. And, of course, her family thinks that she's having night terrors or there's something wrong with her, so they keep bringing her to doctors. And she finally realizes that she's seen her past lives or other people's past lives, and she has the ability to see spirits. And once she realizes this, her next step is, well, what do I do with this power? Do I suppress it? Do I embrace it? And it's really her journey of talking to people and trying to figure out what she needs to do with this power.
I'm very excited for your next book. I mean, you're a brilliant writer, and the storylines that you write are fascinating. I think that's wonderful. So Vivian Elani, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today on Sacred Stories.
Thank you, Reverend Patricia.
And everyone, I want to encourage you to check out Vivian's book, Granite and Gravity. It's available at all major e-tailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, whoever you want, and direct through Sacred Stories Publishing. So Granite and Gravity, a beautiful historical fiction around the Brooklyn Bridge and reincarnation and soul groups. And until then, I'd like to invite you back to our next session of Sacred Stories. And remember to like and share, let everyone know about the beautiful sacred conversations that we have.
Thank you.